Okay, now that we have a better understanding of what rounding means on a number line, that we're trying to find the nicest number or simpler number that's close to whatever number we're dealing with, let's go ahead and talk about a shortcut, because we don't necessarily need number lines to round our numbers. So let's go ahead and break it down. In order to round to the nearest designated place value, look 1 unit to the right of whichever place value you're rounding to. So you're going to notice I usually underline the place value that I'm rounding to. I'll look to the right and then I'll draw a little arrow, and depending on what the number is to the right, that will determine whether we bump up, whether we round up, or whether we round down, and I'll talk about what that means in a moment. So if the digit to the right of whatever place value you're trying to round to, if it is a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you leave the digit in the place value you're rounding to alone. That's called rounding down. Then you turn all digits to the right of it into zeros. There's a little shortcut saying, this is not my claim to fame, I didn't create this myself. However, I've heard this saying before, 4 or less, let it rest. Which means you're just going to leave it alone. So for example, if I'm going to round 1 3/10 to the nearest whole number, well, my whole numbers is my ones place value. So I'm looking to round to my nearest whole value. So I want to know, is that 3 in the tenths value going to bump the 1 up or leave it alone? Well, 1 3/10 is certainly closer to 1 whole thing than 2 whole things. So this would round to 1.0, 1 0/10. And that's what we mean by turning everything to the right of it into zeros. Let's take a look at another example. If we look at 36 and 924 tenths, hundredths, thousandths, we want to round to the nearest tenth. I'm going to underline my tenths place value. The 9 is right there. I'm going to look at the 2. Would the 2 bump that 9 up or leave it alone? It would leave it alone. So this is 36 and 9/10, and we can tack on those zeros. You might be asking yourself if those zeros are necessary. They're not. So you can definitely get rid of them, or you can put them in there. It's really up to you. 830 and 249 thousandths. We want to round to the nearest hundred. Now we have to read carefully because now we're looking at our whole place values. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my hundreds place value. I'm going to look to the right of it. Let's see, what does that 3 do? Well, 830 is certainly closer to 800 than it is to 900. So it will leave the 8 alone. We're going to turn everything else into zeros. Now again, you can add zeros at the end, the decimal and zeros, but you don't have to. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at 800. So let's take a look at what happens if the digit to the right is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. So if the digit to the right is indeed 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, you will increase the digit in the place value that you're rounding to by 1. Then you're going to turn all digits to the right into zeros. So the little saying that I think helps students remember this is 5 or more, raise the score. 5 or more, raise the score. So if the digit behind the place value that you're rounding to, if it's 5 or more, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, you are going to raise the score, quote unquote, raise the score, which means you are going to increase the digit in your place value that you're rounding to. So let's look at this example. 5 and 8/10 rounded to the nearest whole number. Again, that's going to be my ones place value. I'm going to look to the right of it, and I've got an 8. That 8 is going to bump the 5 up. 5 and 8/10 is certainly closer to 6 whole things than it is 5 whole things. 6.0, or you could just put 6. 103 and 29 thousandths. We want to round to the nearest hundredth. Let's underline our hundredths place value. Going to look to the right. That 9 is certainly going to bump that 2 up. So this is going to be 103 103 and 3/100ths. 4,208 and 999 thousandths rounded to the nearest tenth. Let's go ahead and underline our nearest tenth. We're going to look one place value to the right. That 9 is going to bump the 9 up. So when we increase 9 by 1, we get 10. Now remember, 10 tenths, so this 9 tenths would bump up to 10 tenths. 10 tenths, which is 1 whole. So really what we're going to do when we bump this up, this 10 tenths is going to carry over. That's an additional 1 whole thing. So we're actually bumping that up to 1 whole thing. So this is now going to be 4,209 because that 8 is going to be increased by 1 because that rounded up to 10 tenths, which is really 1. So I just kind of regrouped there. Go ahead and try some examples on your own.